Good evening, group. I'm very excited to be here tonight and tell you the story of how we did this in 82 days. It's 82 calendar days, 57 work days. And I'm going to walk through the people, processes, and the technology. And hopefully you'll learn some things from that that you can turn around. But the main lesson is just because we're government, do we have to be old? I mean, I'm already old just by being a person. But do we have to take years to move to the cloud? Do we have to wait until somebody else does it? So I want to walk you through how we did this at SBA. Made a little different slide here because of this group, a little bit on my background. I just entered my 15th year of federal service, which is the 4th time I've gone from the private sector back to the public sector. But I wanted you to know my Microsoft background, 20 years in the industry. I spent 9 years in Microsoft government. Also spent 3 years with Microsoft Gold Partners. And then going way back, I actually opened up the first Microsoft authorized training center in Washington, D.C. back in the 1980s. And some of the courses I taught back then were MS-DOS, and some of you might remember that, Multiplan, and my favorite, Microsoft Word for DOS. Before it was for Windows, it came out for DOS, and it was a fabulous word processor. Competed against WordStar, Multimate, and other type products like that that you might have encountered. So I have a long career experience with Microsoft and wanted to highlight how I was able to do some of these things. So again, why the cloud? We call SBA went through 11 CIOs in the last 12, 14 years, and then would go a year at a time without a CIO. So we call it the lost decade. When Maria Rote took over as CIO last October, and then she brought me and other new employees in on January, we looked at the mess that we inherited. Everything was old, falling apart. We actually had a major network failure because a ceiling tile fell out of the ceiling and ripped all the network wires out of all the servers that were in the rack behind that. Normally not a problem if you label your cables and you label both ends with the same information. We didn't either. We had unlabeled cables that were now ripped out and we didn't know where they went. So that took a while to fix. And then in the time since I've been there, we've had 2 floods, and floods to us is defined as the air conditioning system backs up and there's a pail of water there that starts getting ready to overflow. And I had to send staff in over the weekend to bail. So I've had it with data centers. I'm not ever doing another data center unless it's in the cloud. So again, we're changing from being asset-based to being cloud and services-based. And why are we doing it? SBA is not a technology agency. Our job is to help the small businesses in America employ as many people as possible. Maria and my goal is to make that transparent, to provide technology is always on, always works, always redundant, so we're there. Some of you may not know this. I honestly did not know before I joined SBA that one of the major functions is when a disaster happens, what happens to the small businesses in a disaster area? So like a Katrina comes through and you own a bakery shop that's now underwater. You have loans, you have bills, you have employees you have to pay. The Small Business Administration steps in and helps those businesses survive through a disaster. So a whole area I was not aware of, even though I knew what SBA was. What I saw is that we need to make sure that we don't have ceiling tiles taking out systems or floods. We need to make sure that's always available all the time. So talk about people. We didn't have cloud engineers sitting around waiting for somebody to come in and say, hey, let's go. I inherited a federal staff that had not been trained on maybe going back to my class. They might have come to my classes back in the 80s, but no new technology. But we had to go with what we had. And then for contractors, I was able to use Microsoft Federal and bring in Azure architects to help us. Also brought in Microsoft Gold Partners, and I'm going to in a little bit, I'm going to show you how I paid for that with zero money. And then we had existing contractors where what I did is modified their task work and said, instead of bringing me a physical engineer, I want a cloud experienced engineer. So we didn't have to change the contract terms. All we had to do was change the bodies that were there, because you can't do it without people. The next thing that I did was set up 5 Tiger teams and an executive structure to it so that we could have the integration of the federal employees and the Azure experienced architects and know who's in charge, who can tell who what to do. And those of you that deal with staff and contractors, you know that's something that you cannot let slide. And when I came back to the federal government after my last Microsoft time, I actually went to TSA and started their cloud effort and spent a couple of months developing this team structure. SBA benefited in that I came on board, met with the staff. I told them they had a week to pull together a cloud structure, and if they didn't, I had it solved. After a week went by, they had some ideas, and I said, how about this? Does this work? So we went with it. Very important, you need an executive sponsor at the top that's 100% committed to doing this. Both Maria and I have told the federal staff we are not buying another server or another storage array, physical, period. No more. If something breaks, you better have figured out how to get it to the cloud. If you do not have that leadership, I was asked this question last week when I did another presentation. They said, what if our CIO or our leadership's kind of wishy-washy? They want to go to the cloud, but they're not sure. I said, then don't go. If you don't have that at the top, it's not going to work. Somebody's going to find a reason to stop it. So you need that at the top. We decided that to make me the executive sponsor of the Azure effort. And then since I am deputy CIO and we had 10 years of everything broken and we still have a lot of other things to fix, I don't have 40 hours a week to be the executive sponsor. So we brought in Sanjay Gupta as our CTO as the co-chair, and then Jay Hajir, who is here in the back somewhere. You should say hi to Jay. Jay is our contract manager lead who helps run the team for me every day. So I work with Jay and Sanjay. We make the decision. I go off to 100 different meetings because that's what you do when you're a deputy CIO. And they get it done, and I come back and usually ask them why it takes so long or can we go any faster. Very important. We did a service management team, an engineering team, an automation team, a migration team, and then an operations team. You're going to notice we did not have a separate cloud security team here. We embedded cloud security in every team. You have to do that. I've seen a lot of people do this, in my opinion, wrong. It's almost back to the old waterfall development where the developers build it, and then at the end they throw it over the fence and say, security, you've got an hour to approve it. We baked security in everywhere, and you have to do that. We also baked in, the operations team is grayed out because we knew everything we're doing is going to impact operations, so they were embedded here too. But then each one of these teams is tasked, like the migration Scrum team. We said everything we have in the data center goes to the cloud or we turn it off. We've already turned off almost 200 physical servers, and we've shrunk what we're moving to the cloud. Because again, one thing I told the team is I don't want to move junk to the cloud if we don't need it. Let's get rid of it. The engineering team, very important. One thing that we found at SBA is that we had a lot of audit findings over the last decade that SBA didn't have security baselines for their products, and if we had a baseline, we didn't follow it. One of the decisions Marie and I made was that we were going to use the DISA-STIGs as our baseline for any servers, and then we would modify them and keep track of them. And then we're using System Center to audit ourselves to see if we're following those baselines. So I'm at the point now where instead of fearing auditors, when we finish this, I'm like, come on down, auditors. You want me to run a report right now to show you how we're in compliance, not only at the server level, but at the desktop level. So again, you've got to have that commitment to do that. So the engineering team's working on that, the management team on changing our processes. I told the team, everything that we have was written, SBA is 64 years old. Everything we have as far as our processes was written back for mainframes. I said, blow it up, do not try to rewrite it. Go find another agency who's ahead of us and steal what they're doing. And then we'll give them credit, but let's borrow it. That's why we went with DISA-STIGs instead of coming up with our own standards. Dev app models, we're not the first dev DevOps agency, so we're able to borrow things like that. But how do we do change control? My change control board would meet once a week. And I said, okay, but we're going to be changing the cloud every hour. So how does this work? Well, we got this form and we got this, and then this person's got to approve it. I said, blow it up. It's not going to work. I want instant change control up to a level before it even gets elevated to people. So that's part of what these teams were doing. Again, you cannot just move to the cloud and treat the cloud as if it's a data center. Otherwise, you're going to spend an awful lot of money that you're going to waste, and you're not going to get the improvement on timeliness of what you're doing. So can't do it with people. I always tell people moving to the cloud and doing the migration that we're doing and transformation at SBA is not a technology project. It is a people project. If you don't have people in their right home, and we're coaching and training, one thing that I do is every Friday, I host a lunch and learn session for an hour. And again, I've got thousands of things I could be doing, but the staff knows that Guy is committed to be there. And we use many of the courses from MBA, Microsoft Virtual Academy, that's free. If you don't know about that site, I highly recommend you go to it. The product teams produce them. Every week we do a different Azure or an Office 365 summary of how do we do compliance, or how does Microsoft manage 200,000 SharePoint sites. Fabulous videos, they're free, you can watch them anywhere. We do it during lunch, then we discuss it. Usually I end up by saying, okay, I want to do that, so go change our processes to make that happen. So the technology, I want to give you an idea of what we did. So the team caught me on this one because I said, I don't want to move any of our old junk to Azure, but I want to move right now. And they said, well, Guy, you can't do both because we have stuff that's on Windows Server 2008, and you're telling me you want it on 16. Are you saying that you want us to upgrade before we go? I said, no, I don't want to wait for that. So one of the things we developed was this X tier. I said, we're going to make a beautiful Azure cloud. This is where any infrastructure as a service, we're going to do Windows Server 16, SQL Server 16. We build something new. If we're going to do infrastructure, that's all on the pretty side. We came up with the X tier as basically our garage. So anything that I want to move out now moves to the X tier without being upgraded. But once it's in the X tier, then we make the choice of, are we going to migrate this up to 2016? Or are we going to rewrite it and change it? So that was really eye-opening, and the team helped me develop that concept of here's how we can do both. We can have new and we can have old. But what it does is give us speed. Now we have no holdup. And right now we've moved over 100 servers to Azure as we're in day 150 or so. Because of this, we're able to move it to the X tier and then deal with it from there. Let's talk money. So when I got to SBA, again, those of us that were in feds know that nobody had a budget. We didn't have a budget. We still were on a continuing resolution. And since Maria inherited that budget, we had $0 for cloud in the budget. Once we got money, there was no money for the cloud. So I knew I needed to do things. So I mentioned earlier, I had a Premier Services contract that was mainly break-fix. So I asked Premier, I don't want break-fix, I need architectural help. So again, we already had that contract in place. I just changed the terms of who was there. Our current network operations vendor, who was all physical, I requested that they also bring in people that were cloud-centric, and same with our architectural vendors. So we had current contracts in place. I just asked for a change in scope. And still, I mean, I needed money. So how did I pay for a lot of consulting with no money? From my time at Microsoft, the enterprise agreement, which everybody owns, is still probably the most misunderstood document. I looked at SBA's enterprise agreement history, and we'd let training vouchers and deployment planning days expire every year unused. So first thing I did was turn them on. Deployment planning days, I activated everything I had and put it into Azure. One thing Microsoft doesn't do is they're not real flexible on that, in that you can only do a 1 day, a 3 day, a 5 day, or a 10 day. So I bought 3 10-days and 1 5-day instead of just saying, I want 35 days. But we worked it out with the same partner so that all I had to do was keep processing the paperwork to do that. And then our training vouchers, we had some training vouchers available, but the staff I could see was not going to use them in time for our renewal this year. So training vouchers convert to a consulting day on a 3-to-1 basis. So I converted all the unused training vouchers to additional consulting days. And so the total cost is we had over 10 plus weeks of high-level Microsoft support at zero cost, at no dollars, just using what we already owned in our enterprise agreement. Again, do not, those of you that are in the federal government, do not let these benefits expire. There was tremendous help. So that covered the consulting side. I still had to buy Azure. Again, $0 in the budget. So what I noticed is that the staff was bringing me every renewal that came up for our physical data center. They had 1-year extensions. So I'm looking at tape backup, UPS, physical maintenance on servers. I'm going, but wait a minute, we're going to have half as many servers in 6 months as we have today. Why am I paying for a full year of that service when we don't need it? So every single contract for the data center, I cut it back to exactly what we would need. And then with that money savings, very critical, those of you that are in government, if the CFO and their staff is not your best friend, you need to make them your best friend. People who control money are people that you want to be friends with. So before we did this, we went back to the CFO and said, we could come ask you for $1 million or $2 million of new money to move to the cloud, or will you let us keep our money savings as we're turning contracts down and reinvest that in the cloud? And the CFO told Mary and me, yes, you can do that. Still a lot of paperwork to do it, but again, it allowed us to save, I basically funded $300,000 of Azure out of contract savings of things that we didn't need. Now, I still had some of my staff who loves physical hardware go, but Guy, you're burning the bridge. If we don't move fast enough, these maintenance contracts are all going to expire. And I said, yes, I'm willing to do that. And if we need to, we'll deal with it at that point. But we really have burned the bridge behind us. And again, that's what I talked about at the beginning. You got to go all in. So that's how we paid for Azure without having any money in the budget. So to give you an idea of where we are on our roadmap, we're just in the middle of release 4. We just are getting ready to kick that off, where we're going through the physical migration. We actually have jumped ahead, and if you haven't looked at Azure Site Recovery, it is an incredible tool. We're using it to move our current VMs, VMware, Hyper-V, to the cloud, back them up there, and be happy with that. But we are really planning by the end of the calendar year to have as much of SBA's data center in Azure as possible. The only things that we aren't going to move are things that just won't work today is about it. And the staff knows that they've got to go through me and through Jay in the back there to get us to agree that you can't move it. We've already had people come to us, this 85 terabyte SQL database is too big for Azure, you can't move it. We said, no, move it. Again, you need to take advantage of the cloud there. So, I mean, our journey is going to be within a year. So again, migrate every server possible. And then the other thing that I found is, like most government agencies, I have a security operations center, a network operations center. I get security reports from them. So when Jay turned on the Azure Security Console, I said, please turn it around and point it back at SBA, at our network. And within 5 minutes, Jay was knocking on my door, come see my dashboard. And so a whole bunch of things that were red risk right off the dashboard. And so then we called in the security team and the network team and said, how come you guys aren't seeing this? And now they're adopting the Azure dashboard as part of their security tools. Incredible reports that you get, again, not just of what we have in Azure, but also looking back at our infrastructure. So changes we're making, keeping the employees updated and trained. We're rewriting all of our positions to include cloud. New hires are expected to be experienced in cloud, and all of our future contracts, we're making sure that they cover both a hybrid of where we are today and where we're going. But again, the only reason we're doing this is so that SBA's mission can be better delivered to the small businesses. So last thing, if any of this excites you, I have 10 vacancies right now. I'm looking for network cloud people. So vendors, you cannot contact me, and people that are looking for jobs, you can. They're not contract positions. We are having a blast. I've never had as much fun in my career as what we're doing. Again, 57 working days from the day that I held the first cloud meeting till we had that diagram built. We had servers stood up in management and security console. We had an authority to operate, and we're going every day. I know Jay does, he keeps quiet, but then he'll tell me, oh, guy, I just moved another 20 servers this week. So again, you can do this. Don't wait. Make sure you have the sponsorship at the top. And like I said, if you don't have it, then send me your resume because you have it at SBA. So any questions with that on my time left? Yes, sir.
Hi. This is a question that might be a bit out of place, but I wanted to know about it. How did you decide to go to Azure rather than, let's say, AWS or something else? What was the key points that made you choose Azure over the competition? And
Okay.
what pushback did you get from the rest of the folks?
Very, very good question. My predecessors long ago made SBA a very strong Microsoft investment shop, and we already had an effort underway under Amazon, and I don't like going with just one cloud, so the fact that we had so many Microsoft licensing and could leverage what we're doing with Azure made it a no-brainer for us. We did develop a cloud strategy that reflects that, but it really was, we already were in Office 365. We already had tremendous SharePoint investment over the last 20 plus years, so we knew we were going to stay with SharePoint and SharePoint Online. And so with the other competitors for Azure, all I could do is infrastructure as a service as long as Microsoft still provides a SharePoint server. But with Microsoft going online, again, my end goal is to get out of servers and do everything online. And we didn't talk about it here, but we're turning on everything with Office 365. And the competitors know that anything that's a third party, I'm turning off and saying, we own this with Microsoft. Power BI, part of our Office 365 suite, not buying MicroStrategy, not buying Tableau, don't need it. I'm going to own Power BI for every human. That'll be a separate conversation on we're dividing SBA into humans and computer accounts, and pay attention to them because I was paying for a lot of email for computers to talk to each other. So you need to write O365 licensing. We got no pushback on that. I said, so we're in Amazon and Azure. The decision coming down the road is when we get a request to build something new, the development team, I'm probably going to let them battle it out. Do they want to build it in Azure or do they want to build it in Amazon? At that point, I want them to build it in whichever works best. We intended to use a lot of Skype, which will tend to, my question to the team is if we're going to be interactive with our citizens, and we're doing that through Skype, are you factoring in the data egress charges if we put this in Amazon versus Azure? I bought Azure off of our enterprise agreement. I did not issue an RFP. I just ordered X number of cleanse. All the money I saved, you buy Azure in chunks. I ordered as many units of that to use it up, and it's done. You don't have to compete all of this. But very good question.
Hello, thank you. Can you talk about any sort of over-the-top innovations that you see coming that you're going to be able to do now that you're in the cloud? Things that you weren't going to ever be able to do on the data center side?
Sure. I think it actually hits more on the O365 capabilities. Something that really bothers Maria and me is that SBA has offices all over the country. I've owned my own small business, or at least I was in a major metropolitan area. But we know that we have customers who have to jump in their car and drive 2 or 3 hours to meet with SBA to get help with how do I get a business loan or all that, and then jump in their car and drive back. The biggest impact we see is that we intend to use Skype to allow those communications to happen without the person having to travel. So, I mean, it is through the cloud, through O365. But as far as impact on the people applying, that's one. The other thing we're seeing in the cloud is in our development, we're able to do more. One thing that, as SBA is not the only agency that has this problem, is we have multiple programs that a small business could apply for. But you have to know which ones to apply for before you start the process. Otherwise, you start filling out forms and you spend hours, and all of a sudden you get at the end, you're not qualified. So we're trying to reverse that and do more of a pre-check up front so that you know if you're an 8A program or a small business, minority-owned women's program or a veterans program, straighten that out. And we're redoing the front end of all of those through our cloud, which has given us the development environment and the production and the migration environments at once. But like I said, it's really changing how we interact with our citizens is the biggest impact I see. I'd love to do Internet of Things. I don't see Internet of Things being something that SBA does, but we are an agency that gives out money, and you need to turn in forms to get money. So what we're trying to do is simplify that.
All right. The question I have for you is, I know you mentioned you moved close to 200 servers to the Azure cloud. Two questions follow up to that. How many applications do you think were part of those 200 servers, and what challenges you had to overcome? Because it's not a straightforward lift and shift, right? Taking the virtual machines and putting out there. The applications running on those servers need to be compatible with the Azure cloud environment. As an example, I can tell you, I mean, multicast as an example doesn't work on a virtual machine in the cloud. So how did you overcome those challenges when you have different applications? For example, even going back to compliance to Azure SQL Server, not the Azure SQL database, some of the stored procedures are not compatible when you move to the Azure cloud from a on-premise server. So how did you overcome those challenges, or if you did come across any challenges?
Well, definitely there are going to be challenges. What we wanted to do was quantity, and so we've looked at the servers and the apps and moved as many easy ones first, and then we'll have the ones that require some tweaking next, and the ones that are more difficult, we'll do that. And I would say as far as numbers, probably several hundred apps tied to those servers, but we're looking at them one at a time, evaluating, are there any dependencies, using a lot of the current tools that are built in to Azure to help us look at that, and also with Microsoft consultants helping us do that. And something that's hard, we're gonna put that to the end, because again, if I got water coming in my data center, I want to have fewer servers to have to bail out. So if I can move a bunch of little ones, I'll move them first, just to give us that resiliency.
Did you have to build a test environment to make sure those applications were running before you moved to production?
Yeah, back in our architecture structure, we have a test environment, a development environment, and a production environment that, unlike my physical data center, they actually all match because we cloned them, which, again, anybody that's been in government a long time, usually you're going to hear the developers complain that the test and the development environments don't match production, so that when they moved it, that's why it broke. Can't be their code. It's never their code, but it's because you didn't give them the right environment. The beauty with Azure is that you can clone what you have, and you have everything's identical.
Thank you very much. My question is, what is your strategy of your cloud in the next few years? To move everything from data center to the cloud, or the hybrid, maintain something in the on-prem?
Yeah, our intention, if there's any way we can pry it off the floor, it's going to the cloud. Only things that we have to leave behind are going to stay on-prem. So I mean, I don't think we'll be 100% in the cloud, but if you're 95% cloud and 5% on-prem, is that still really hybrid? I mean, definitely it's going to be way beyond 50-50.
Okay, how many Azure subscriptions you have so far?
Let's see. Jay, we're up to 3 now, yes. And when you talk about subscriptions, one thing that always comes up are you charging customers and offices for this? We are not planning to do a chargeback, but we are planning to use the subscription model to help us determine what the cost of each individual system is. Oh, that'll work. Am I here? Yes. If we need additional money from a program office, it's really helpful to let them know how much the app costs. But again, I don't recommend going to the cloud and immediately charging everybody for it, because unless you do a really accurate bill on premise now, you're going to scare your customers and they're going to say, I don't like this.
So guys, thank you very much for the great presentation. I think one thing you said about the executive sponsorship, that rings true with, I think, many of us here, you know, without that, and I think that's why you've been so successful. Are you thinking, right now you've moved your machines to the cloud, are you thinking of you know, you ultimately also probably want to go to platform as a service capabilities, so are you thinking about allocating money to sort of refactor these applications so you don't even have to worry about servers in the cloud? Is that something?
Yeah, very, very good question. I said my end goal is that I don't own any servers anywhere. So software and platform as a service will be our preferred. I've had this debate, and you probably have had it too, where if you start this effort, somebody will say, but just give me time to rewrite the app and I'll move it to platform, and then you won't have to put it as infrastructure. And they never give you a timeline. What I find is usually like 20 years. Well, I'd rather be infrastructure in the cloud first and then rewrite it for platform and get out of the physical business. I can tell you, like I said, maybe from my private sector time, but being back before the government, the best discussions I ever have with a CFO is when you go to them and say, if you support this cloud effort, I'm going to be able to give you a steady state bill where if I stay in the data center, every 3 or 4 years, I'm going to come to you and ask for $10, $20 million to rebuy the data center. And you ask them which one of those models would they like. Every one of them will take steady state. And so not having to recap a data center is critical in this discussion. And like I said, make sure your CFO and your money people are involved in this, because if you only do a 1 or 2 year study and you don't include the recap, the cloud could cost you more. You have to include really that next time, and they hate those big boom bust cycles of recapping data centers.
One more question.
That one's not working.
One more question.
I think one part we missed out is data, business data. So how did you go about securing the data, which is critical for a business?
Very good question. Like most federal agencies, SBA has data everywhere, and we have redundant data that contradicts each other everywhere. So another effort that we've launched is a data, we've brought in our first data specialist to actually work with the program offices and start talking about our common model. You know, Power BI is great, but if you have 15 different versions of the same data, which scorecard do you report to Congress, or which one do you use internally to make decisions? We've just started that journey, but what we're doing is we're turning on encryption at rest, encryption in transit, get it up to Azure, then hopefully we'll come together with our data standards. And anybody who loves family fights, just get a group together and have them argue about data. My data is better than your data. And I've seen this in government many times where even within one of your larger offices, they hate each other because they won't even, I saw one office that had an interagency agreement between themselves on sharing data. I mean, not even another agency. So you have to have that. And the thing I hate is we can't make the US citizens call an agency and enter the same data 5 times over because they called different offices. Should be one time, one interaction with government, but it takes a lot of work to do that. Definitely secure your data, but then like I said, we're going to expose through Power BI some of the benefits of that data, and then we're going to have our data wars too. But thank you all. Really, it's been a great trip doing this.